Welcome to the Your City podcast, where we get to know our neighbors so that we can be a good neighbor. I'm your host, Aaron Williams, and today I'm joined by Jonathan Nichols, who is the executive director of the Woodman Museum here in the city of Dover. He is also a local historian. We're going to talk to him about the history of Dover and a little bit about the museum and how he came to be involved with it. Jonathan, thank you for coming onto the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're doing a new segment here with the shout out. Do you have a business or a person in the city of Dover that you want to shout out and give some attention to?
Absolutely. So my shout out would be for Dan Demers and the Strand Theater. So Dan Demers is the owner of the Strand. He's working very hard to bring the Strand back to Dover. It's a historic theater that's been around for several decades at this point. It's one of the last Strand theaters in the country, and he's doing some great work. They do things like concerts, they do movies, the plays. Last year, one of the coolest things I thought he did is for Halloween, he did a horror movie marathon for like 2 straight weeks of different like Friday the 13th movies.
Oh, that sounds so fun.
And so he's doing a lot of great work, and they have events all the time. And so you should definitely check out the Strand Theater.
All right. Yeah. Go check out the Strand Theater. All right. So to get started, I really wanted to talk about the history of Dover. This is a very old city, celebrating its 400th year. This is one of the oldest cities in the country, right?
It is. It's actually the 7th oldest European settlement within the United States.
Okay, wow. So how did Dover get started? Like what brought people to Dover? Why did they say, yes, this location?
Yeah, so before we get to that, we'll go all the way back to like the first European contact with New Hampshire.
Okay.
And that was Martin Pring in 1608. They were going up and down the coast looking for primarily timber and fishing. And so the Atlantic cod in the area, and then the white pine trees of this area. The white pines were actually perfect for like ship masts. And so eventually like surveyors would come to New Hampshire looking for ship's masts for the King of England. And so fast forward close to 20 years later is 1623. That's when the Hiltons come up the river to Dover Point. Okay. So that's when they first settled here in Dover, is 1623, right down on the south end over by Great Bay. And again, it was for fishing, it was for timber, it was for a whole slew of different.
They were looking for building materials and food and stuff like that.
There was such things as like brick making with like clay down over on the point and things like that. So that's what initially drew everyone to Dover. And like I said, we're the 7th oldest European settlement because of 1623. There is a little bit of infighting between us and Portsmouth because they were also on that trail. And so Portsmouth, New Hampshire is also celebrating their 400th anniversary this year.
So the two cities started pretty close. Like we're number 7, they're number 8. I say we because I live in Dover now.
Yeah. So they are probably about a month ahead of us. But there is like some dispute on whether or not it's a permanent settlement or not, because they landed at Odiorn Point and then move their way up to Dover and then would go back and things like that. So
gotcha. A friendly rivalry, I'm sure.
Friendly, absolutely friendly.
So you mentioned the Hiltons. Who are the Hiltons?
So the Hiltons were Edward and now I'm forgetting the other man's name. Oh, that's great. But Edward Hilton and his brother came from England, and they were the leaders of this voyaging group that came and settled what would eventually become Dover. Originally, it was named Cachiko after the Cachiko River. It's gone through a whole slew of different names throughout the years. It was Bristol for a period of time. It was Northam for another period of time.
Gotcha. So over the years, it's gone from, hey, we're cutting down trees and we're fishing here. Now there's these old mills that are sitting on top of the river. You've got a lot of old buildings in this area. How has the landscape, the cityscape, evolved over the centuries?
Yeah. So like you said, it was a lot of timber at first. So the original settlement of Cachiko Village was pretty much a frontier town. here at the museum, we actually have one of the oldest houses, or actually the oldest house in Dover. It was built in 1675, and it's a garrison fort. And so this is a fort that was, or a house that was built with defense in mind. The walls are like a foot thick. There's gun ports in the side of it, because after this, it was all woodlands, and so this was as far as the European settlements went for a time. And so you had things like King's Forest or Kingswood. That's why you have towns literally called Kingswood, is because surveyors would go out for the king and find white pine trees that measured in a certain diameter and put an axe, like a arrow head, into the tree with an axe. And that was called a king's broadhead, and that designated that you had things like that was for the king, that was going to be a ship's mast. And so it was originally timber.
Don't touch this, it's been marked.
Exactly. And so timber was the big thing, and then come the 19th century, primarily the 1820s, is when we have the Industrial Revolution pretty much hit Dover in the form of a cotton mill and a wool mill. And so the one downtown was the Kachiko Manufacturing Company, and then eventually became the Kachiko Mill and Print Works.
So it was textiles.
It was textile, and it was a cotton mill. And then on the south end of town, over where like Burger King is now, is the Sawyer Mills, and that was the wool mill in town, and that was opened in the 1820s as well.
Okay, so the ones that are here in the downtown are the old cotton mills.
Yeah, it's the old cotton mill, and that pretty much is what the town is now. Once those mills came in, the whole town pretty much boomed, all the way up until like the 1930s and 40s. The mill itself was finally closed in 1945, if I believe.
So you mentioned that the Garrison, which is the oldest house in Dover,
Yep,
was built in 1675. So there were no houses here for 50 years.
No. So that was just the oldest house still standing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
okay. So where are people living?
Well, so yeah, you had first period homes, these kind of like log cabins that were all throughout the town. You might have heard Dover is nicknamed the Garrison City.
Okay.
That goes back to our garrison as well as all the other garrisons in town. As I said, it was kind of a frontier town. So there were actually 14 garrisons just in the downtown area. And during times of attack or panic or something like that, all the local families would go to their assigned garrison. So you had 14 garrisons in just the downtown area now, but there was like 60 something in the greater Dover area.
Wow.
Because at one point, Dover was actually much larger than it is now. Dover encompassed Madbury, Newington, Rollinsford, and Somersworth, and us.
Oh, man.
And then eventually we shrank, and they all started finding their own parishes and their own communities and things like that.
Oh, cool. So the cotton mills, what caused them to close down? Like, obviously they're not cotton mills today. We're not using them for that purpose. I think they're like residential business. And like
they are. They're
businesses.
Residential. They're local restaurants, companies, things like that.
So when did the cotton mill start, I guess, declining?
So that would have been in the 1860s and 70s is when it first starts declining.
Okay.
So originally it opens in the 1820s. New England Northern Mills, or that kind of funded the entire northern side of the United States, was the industrial side of the country. And so we specialized here in cotton textiles, primarily one called calico. So calico prints were a special kind of cotton textile where the colors were more vibrant, less prone to fading. And eventually, after the Civil War, mills started moving out of the North for cheaper land and taxes down in the South. And so that's what is like pretty much the first nail in the coffin for, our mill and other local mills. We were eventually bought out by the Pacific Mills in Lowell, and then just went from there.
So you mentioned the Civil War, and you have a degree in history, right?
American history.
American history, and you heavily focused on like colonial times, like before
yeah, it was early American history. So like, colonial period up to like the Civil War era.
Gotcha. What are some things that people kind of they think they know, but it's a misconception or there's a misunderstanding as to like the truth of the history there. What are some things that people commonly get wrong about that era of American history?
Yeah. So an interesting thing that I learned about while I was at UNH was the idea of the Union in the South. The Union was, they would fight to end slavery, but it wasn't so much the idea that they viewed people as equal. In fact, there was a lot of race riots right here in New England all throughout the 1800s. And
Hmm.
so there's some interesting examples that I learned of during my time at UNH studying. The Noise Academy riots of 1835 was an interesting one in which they actually tried to start an all-black school
Hmm.
in Canaan, New Hampshire. And the people of Canaan, with the surrounding towns, actually rioted against this school and drove them from the town. And then it sounds fanciful, but it's actually an actual event. They tied 100 oxen to this schoolhouse and dragged it off its foundations into a swamp.
What the heck?
Exactly. Yeah. So you don't really think about that happening in like the abolitionist North, but the
Yeah.
abolitionist movement was, for lack of a better term, like a fringe movement at first, and then it eventually
Mm.
gains traction. And so that's just one example.
Yeah. So it wasn't just like, oh yeah, the South are fighting to keep slaves and the North are fighting to free slaves. There was still this
Yeah.
kind of racism was still alive in the North, even though
Yeah.
slavery wasn't.
Yeah. So yes, slavery was outlawed in the North, and obviously they fought to end it.
Yeah.
But the relations,
Mm.
the race relations in the area were just as volatile as the South, and so that was just something interesting that I
Yeah,
learned while I
yeah.
was there. Yeah.
And that thank you for sharing that because that's something that probably a lot of people do get wrong
Hmm.
about, because when you look back, history it can change with time where certain ideas get flattened. I don't know if that's the right way to
Mm.
describe it, but when you're looking at something with a high amount of detail and complexity, it takes a long time to look at that.
Hmm.
So eventually, stuff will lose detail over time until it manifests into a flatter, simpler, easier to consume idea because it's easier to do that than to spend a whole year going all over all the details of everything. So in this process, things get lost.
Hmm.
What how do you see that affecting our view of history as Americans now, looking back on things? Stuff gets flattened out, stuff gets simplified. How does that happen over time? Like, what does that process actually look like in real time? Are we, because I imagine we're doing some of that stuff today.
Hmm.
There are things that happened in the 80s and 70s that we're just kind of like, we don't fully understand, but we think we do.
Right. So yeah, I think, well, for history in general, a lot of it stems from public education. And I'm not going to knock anything that public education does, but I think that a lot of people go through school and, history's not everyone's favorite subject. In fact, I hear it's pretty much everyone's least favorite subject sometimes. And so when you go through school, you get kind of like a surface level education
Hmm.
on historical events in town, or not in town, but just in the country, worldwide, what have you. And so we do lose a lot of historical knowledge that way because primarily not everyone's going to go to college and take, 20 different history courses.
Yeah.
They're going to go with what they learned in elementary school, middle school, high school, and then that's their only ever real experience with history. And so I think that plays a part into it as well. That you don't learn everything. It's trying to cover everything with a broad brushstroke, and
Yeah.
you miss the finer details.
So you think that the curriculums are just kind of moving quickly through through some of these subjects, or they're just not like?
Well, it's a lot of history to cover.
Gotcha.
So when you only have, one class a day, or,
Plus, you got
yeah,
math and
you
English
got
and all
math,
these other
science,
things. Yeah.
English, English, it's a lot to cover. And so, you touch on like the Revolutionary War
Mm-hmm.
during like elementary school. And so you're not going to get into like the nitty gritty with a bunch of 8-year-olds.
Yeah.
But then that's their only real exposure to like the colonial
And then you're moving on.
and then you're moving on to the 1800s,
Yeah.
and then you're moving on into like the 1900s in high school and things like that.
So this makes me think, okay, why do we teach history? Like, what is the purpose of teaching it and teaching that context of like, hey, this is kind of what came before? What is important about the subject of history? Why is it important to study?
Well, it's knowing where we came from. And
Yeah.
so you hear that phrase every single time. Those who ignore history are doomed to repeat it. And so it's just an interesting way to see, you can connect historical events to current events today and see how those were interpreted then and how we should apply them today. And that's just, one aspect of it, but it's the human experience, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Like to sort of just analyze over time how things changed. And I love history. I listen to, there's Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. I don't know if you're familiar.
I've heard it.
You like it?
Oh yeah, I've listened to a handful of episodes.
He can get people, or he can just like tell this narrative that just pulls you in, and he's adding so much context and details and really trying to explain like this is how people felt while they were in, like for instance, the World War I. He's reading the quotes and stuff from the generals, and he's reading like soldiers' journals and stuff like that. He's adding so much context and detail to that, and it's so entertaining, right? And I feel like there's so much value in hearing those stories and hearing like these are real people's stories. These aren't, fictional or anything like that. And you can learn so much about that. You're in a museum. So you are a container of history.
Exactly.
You have all of this stuff around, and all of this has meaning and purpose. And to you, you're super excited about all this stuff. I'm very sure. How do you approach sharing that excitement, getting other people excited, connecting it to a story, kind of like, I guess, the way Dan Carlin does it and gets me excited about history. How do you get other people excited?
Yeah. So while you're mentioning Dan Carlin, another one that comes to mind is actually Peter Jackson's movie,
They Shall Never Grow Old.
They Shall Never Grow Old, which he literally went and colorized and added sound to these old black and white war films from World War I, and you get to actually like see these people, and so that kind of ties in,
makes it feel alive at that point.
Makes it feel alive.
It's like, oh, it's black and white, that's old stuff. That's way back when, but then when you see it and it looks,
now you're here, you're experiencing it,
you can see it.
I kind of feel like that ties into the museum a little bit, in that my personal goal is to make history entertaining. Like something that you want to experience, something that you want to learn. So especially with the museum here, like we can have a whole bunch of artifacts and you come in and you glance through them real quick, and then that's the only time you ever see them, and then that's it.
Yeah.
But what are you taking away from that? So personally for myself, like one of my favorite artifacts that we have here is a music box from Geneva, Switzerland, in the 1860s. And it's still playable to this day. And so actually, when I go take tours through our Hale House, where it's at, I play it for everyone. And so you get to hear the same music that someone in 1861 was listening when they received that music box. And so in that, you're not just looking at a music box and saying, oh, wow, that's cool. That's, almost 200 years old. It's, wow, that's cool. This sounds beautiful. This is like, I can understand why they would be interested in that. And so you're experiencing the history. That's why I do like that. I do things like Civil War reenacting. And that's just like personal passion of mine.
I do want to talk about that. Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show.
But yeah, you get to see all these cool things. Like another exhibit that we have is a natural history exhibit. And one is fluorescent minerals. I don't know if you're familiar with what those are, but they glow under ultraviolet light.
Okay.
And so when we just turn the regular white light on, it's just, you're looking at rocks. But then when we add the UV lights to it, they start glowing in like purples and greens and oranges and reds. And that's one of the more interesting things I think we have for kids, is because they're like looking at this light show, this
Yeah, yeah. They're
rock
like,
show.
whoa,
Yeah.
cool.
But yeah. So you're getting to experience nature and something that you might not others get to see. So for me, it's the content is important, but the experience is just as
Yeah.
phenomenal.
So you want a kid to come in and go home with a story of like, yeah, and there was these rocks that glow in the dark, and
Yeah,
like you
yeah.
want them to have like these connections that they can look back on. And it wasn't just like, boring field trip. It was like, oh wow, so cool. There was this and there was that. And I have so many stories to walk away with.
Exactly.
Cool. Very cool. Very cool. And you are, like I mentioned, the director of the Woodman Museum. You just talked about a couple of exhibits. What all does the Woodman Museum cover? Kind of what are you offering to the community other than music boxes and fluorescent rocks?
It's kind of hard to describe that, only because the Woodman Museum was founded in 1916. So we are about to go into our 107th season of being a museum.
Very impressive.
But when it was originally founded, it was determined that it was supposed to cover art, history, and science. That's just about everything.
Yeah.
So we've been called like the most eclectic museum in the area. So we have literally, I tell people, if you don't find something you find interesting, give it 10 minutes and we'll find you something.
Yeah.
Because one of our houses has natural history. There's a 10-foot tall polar bear. There's an alligator from Florida. There's an entire floor of birds and owls. And
So there's a lot of taxidermy?
there's a ton of taxidermy in one house. But also in that house is military history on the entire third floor. Yeah. We have a children's school and boys and girls club exhibit. So there's like toys and stuff from like all the local schools and colleges and Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. That's also in one house. And then you have the rock, the mineral gallery as well. That's one house. Then you go to the garrison, the 1675 garrison. So you get to actually go walk through that. And there's artifacts from that time period all the way up until the early 1900s, because it was all like the collection of the final owner of the garrison who donated it to us. And then the Hale House, which is a lot of local artifacts or locally tied. And there's a wide variety of topics. There's things like music, stuff about the mills, stuff about world travelers who brought things back from China, Japan, ancient Egypt, things like this.
I heard you have a samurai suit.
Yes, we do have a samurai suit of armor.
Oh, wow.
And a katana from the end of the Russo-Japanese War.
Yeah.
So yeah, we have that as well.
I always think like suits of armor and stuff that people wore is always so interesting because it's very decorative.
It
and
is.
They put in all this effort to create this like beautiful thing to wear, and it also has function. It's not just a decoration. Obviously, that's a part of it, but it needs to be functional too. And at some point, like somebody put in so much effort into making this. I don't know that. Whenever I go into museums, that's what catches me is the artistry and the craftsmanship of some of the old artifacts of like somebody spent a lot of time making and crafting this.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you get to see the effort.
The effort. Yeah. Whereas today, people are 3D printing things, and I don't want to take away from the artistry that goes into designing stuff, but the Industrial Revolution in a lot of ways made things cheaper, not just monetarily, but also in like context.
Yeah.
And it's a challenge to think about that because on the one hand, it was that you were able to produce more for more people. And that's a wonderful that's a wonderful thing to achieve. But that artistry that we're talking about of like, no, this was made with an intent and a passion and it's unique and it meant something to someone at some time, kind of gets lost along that way.
Right. Yeah.
You're trying to direct the museum in a specific way. What is your vision for the museum? Where do you want to take it? Where is it right now that it's not living up to your vision? Kind of like what progress are you looking to make?
Yeah. So, like I said, we're going into our 107th season. You would think that we are like the focal point of the town. But having been a volunteer tour guide before this position, part time, um, you get a lot of people that come through here who have lived here, called Dover home for 40, 50 years, and that's their first time ever coming in. I hear all the time, oh, we
Hmm.
have a history museum, or I never knew. I've driven by here, I've seen the sign. We used to be called the Woodman Institute. That's what we were originally. A lot of people thought we were a school.
Okay.
So
So it's just bad marketing.
yeah, well, bad marketing, and I personally feel like we've been on the outskirts of town. So downtown is only a block or two away, but there's not a lot between us and the downtown.
Okay.
So people have to make a conscious effort to come over here.
Hmm.
And my personal goal is to bring the museum to the town, expand our community footprint. So we've done larger community events, adding more of those. We're hosting some of those ourselves now. Um, we just want to be more part of the community and something that people can be proud of and boast about to their friends and family and acquaintances. And so, yes, that's one of my primary goals, is to expand our community footprint.
Is to become the talk of the town.
That's what I'm hoping. I mean, this is the year. It's the 400th anniversary of town. Everyone's focused on Dover history. Well, we have the largest collection of Dover history in the area.
This is your chance, man.
Exactly. So that, and then my other goal is children. So we're an old school museum. You know, it's a lot of signage, lots of reading,
Okay.
lots of quiet reflection, and well, we have families coming through all the time, but I can see it in their eyes. They see the Woodman house is kind of free range. They get to run around, go look at all the animals. I show them the rock show, and you know, that's probably like a lot of kids that I've seen their favorite thing, because it's glowing rocks. Who doesn't like glowing rocks?
I mean, yeah.
After that is a guided tour of the other three houses, and I can just see them slowly start to lose interest because it's an hour and a half long tour, and 9 times out of 10, I'm just seeing kids like, can we go to like La Festa's Pizzeria or Wickies and Chewy's ice cream shop now? Like,
Yeah.
come on. So trying to change that with some new kids programming, scavenger hunts, a new mascot. We have a mascot for the museum coming. So,
What kind of mascot?
his name is Woody the Woodman Bear. He's
Okay.
a polar bear.
That's to go with your 10-foot polar bear.
To go with our 10-foot polar bear. And so we will have him come to a lot of our events, and we're developing signage that are kid friendly and easily digestible for them to read while they go through these tours. And so it's not some of our larger descriptions. It's not like a book that they have to read anymore. It's, you know, something kid friendly, and will connect them to that time period. So we'll ask you like thought provoking questions, and you get to go find Woody around the museum.
Okay, so it turns a little bit more into there's a kind of a game that you're playing while looking at things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So something to keep people engaged.
Where did you get these ideas from?
So I used to work for the Children's Museum.
Oh.
So a lot of the kids programming stuff, especially the mascot, just in general, that idea came from that, because they do things like meet and greet story times with characters from different children's books. So they had, oh God, I can't remember half these characters anymore. Like Pygmalion, I think once went. And so there was Pygmalion.
Is this like how McDonald's has? You've got Ronald McDonald and the Hamburglar.
The Hamburger Grimace.
Grimace. Is this like that?
Kinda. It's like, I just want it to be a place that's like family friendly, and so for me personally, I come from a very hardcore Disney family.
Okay.
So we are at Disney World all the time. In fact, my parents are literally flying to Disney World tomorrow. So yeah, that's, I'm trying to bring the family aspect to the museum a little bit more, and my experience from the Children's Museum and from Disney.
Yeah.
Kids love mascots. Kids love to meet the characters that they can associate with and like relate to.
At Disney World, you've got the hidden Mickey.
Exactly. Yes, they do have that. So who knows? Maybe I'll have
That
a hidden polar bear or something. I don't
yeah.
know. We'll
Oh,
see.
that could be fun.
Yeah.
So I'm super curious about this next topic, which we brought up earlier, is the Civil War reenactments.
Hmm.
What does that hobby look like? I've heard of it. I've seen like TV shows or movies where they're doing that.
Yep.
What is this? I don't know anything about it.
Yeah. So it goes into that whole aspect that I like of public education of history,
Hmm.
trying to bring history to life
Okay.
for people. And so my unit that I'm with is the First New Hampshire Light Artillery. We're a artillery unit out of Bedford, New Hampshire. So we actually have a 10-pound cast iron Perrott cannon.
When you say these things, you're talking about in the context of like we're pretending to be this real life
Yes.
unit.
So the First New Hampshire Light Artillery was an actual unit
Okay.
in the Civil War. They were at Gettysburg. They were all over. And so we are portraying that unit. And so we go to different events, and we're the First New Hampshire. And so we were actually at Gettysburg back in the 4th of July last year as the First New Hampshire, taking part in a reenactment battle. So you got to see how that would have kind of looked.
What does the reenactment, what is the goal of the reenactment? Is it like literally just to replay it?
You know, everyone has a different motivation behind it. Our group is really education based. And so we'll do things like living history events, which is just us as a group. We set up our camp, we set up our cannon, and then we educate whoever comes through on the Civil War and the
Hmm.
First New Hampshire's involvement, and basically what it was like to be an artilleryman. And so we will actually go fire this cannon all over the place.
Heck yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. But we'll like one person who is actually there talking to the crowd while we go through the motions. And so you'll hear our sergeant call out, you know, the next step in the loading process, the firing process, and in between each step, we'll say, okay, so this is what this person is doing during this step. This is what we're adding. This is how the equipment is being used. And then we go to the next step. And so we go through the whole artillery handbook,
Hmm.
essentially, and then fire the cannon. And then we'll also just like rapid fire the cannon so you can see, you know, full speed what it was kind of like, without having to stop every 5 seconds to tell, okay, so we're now adding the primer to this. And,
Okay.
yeah. And so that is one aspect that we do. And then the battles themselves are large scale events. They can be kind of private ones that we just want to do for ourselves for fun, or they are large public, affairs. And so the Gettysburg one, there was, I want to say like 4,000 or 5,000 people just in the crowd watching us on the Union side and the Confederates on the other side. Both had artillery lines, both had cavalry and infantry, and we were recreating the battle plans of I forget, of course, put on the spot. I forget the exact battle we were we were doing. It wasn't Gettysburg,
But it was a good one. Okay.
but it was
a
one.
good one.
Yeah, and so we start, with the artillery going back and forth, and then the infantry marches up behind us, and they get out onto the field. And the way that it plays out is, how it was written out in the after action report. And
Okay.
so you're seeing kinda, just how that actually happened.
So there is an attempt at recreating
Yeah,
the narrative.
exactly.
Okay.
So we are trying, and some are more hardcore than others, but we are trying to be as true to form. Literally every piece of clothing, every button, every shoelace is an exact representation of what, a soldier in the Civil War was wearing.
Yeah.
And so like, I have buttons on some of my uniforms that they're actually from 1863, 1864.
That's cool.
Our clothing is like specially made, and yeah, we try to be as true to form as possible. So it's like you are seeing a Civil War soldier, and you're
Yeah.
experiencing the history.
Wow.
So yeah.
When you're doing these things and you're shooting all these cannons and you're just kind of like, I guess, going through the routine of the armaments or something, like you're just trying to kind of like get a feel for what the weaponry was capable of. Is that what y'all are doing?
Yeah, so it it depends, I guess. Trying to answer that question. Um,
Because you said there's the reenactment of the battles, but before that there's the like
living
just
history.
the testing of the equipment, or the
Yeah.
firing of the cannons, and just
Yep.
kind of doing it for fun, but also
Yeah.
what's the deeper part of that?
So that is just one kind of event that we do. Like we'll go to say, well, we actually come here for Memorial Day. We go to Pine Hill Cemetery across the street, and there's a whole ceremony right at the Civil War Monument in Pine Hill Cemetery. While we're doing that history, we're also making sure that we cover everyone
Okay.
on Memorial Day. So we have like guest speakers. Myself, the mayor, a couple other veterans are coming through, and then my Civil War unit does a cannon salute, and then we go down to the lower field and we shoot the cannon a couple times and just explain what that would look like, what that um, would feel like, things like that.
Yeah.
So that's one. The other one where we were on the battle, there was no talking like that. The people were just watching the battle play out, and so we were on one side of the field with, I want to say, like 16 other units, artillery units from around the country, and we we had one artillery like commander, and he would order the shots, and we went right down the line for the opening shot, and then it was kind of fire at will at one point, and so we just as our unit just went to town and
Yeah.
fired as we could. So in that, it's like less about the explanation and more of the visual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just kind of like experiencing it.
Exactly.
Okay, very cool, very cool. So with the reenactments, are you guys actually giving yourself, I am this soldier? Like everybody has a name and everybody has a person that they're representing, or is it just kind of like, oh, we're this group?
Yep. So we are the First New Hampshire Light Artillery, and we are a newer group. We've been around for, I want to say, about like 5 years at this point, but we do have some newer members. I'm actually technically one of the newer members, even though I've been there for like 3 years.
Takes a while, I guess.
It does,
to
but
not be new anymore.
But we've had people in our unit who have done historical reenactment, Civil War reenactments for 30, 40 years. So I am definitely the greenhorn in this. But we're currently working on our historical impressions, and we do actually go and find someone who is who actually served in that unit and learn about them and try to portray them in like living history ones when people are just walking through our camp and looking at the camp itself and talking to us. We do try and portray those individuals,
like how they do at the Strawberry Bank,
exactly,
in Portsmouth.
Yep, just like that. And so mine is Silas Holbrook. He was a private in the First New Hampshire along with his brother Arthur. And so there's a guy that kind of looks like me. And so we decided, okay, well, we'll be the Holbrook brothers.
Yeah.
And so he's Arthur, I'm Silas. Technically, Arthur died very early on in the war, but we can play with the year.
We ignore that.
Yeah, we can play with the year a little bit. So yeah, right now it's 1861, and Arthur's fine.
If there's somebody out there who is like, man, this sounds fun, I'd totally want to go dress up in an old soldier's uniform and like get into that. Where do you even get started? How do you find these groups? How do y'all recruit?
Yeah, so we it's kind of by word of mouth at the moment. We do have a website. It's First New Hampshire Light Artillery, or Light Battery, sorry.
.com.
.org. And yeah, you can literally just type in First New Hampshire Light Artillery on Google. It'll come up. It will come up. But we're one of many units. There's like a cav unit. There's infantry, like the 5th New Hampshire Infantry. But yeah, it's kind of word of mouth. We have a handful of people that always come up to us at some historical reenactments and say, well, how do we get interested? And you just started. And so how I actually got introduced to the group is through our board chairman. Um, when I first started volunteering here, he's actually in the group with me,
Mm-hmm.
and we were sitting in the gift shop doing tours that day. Well, and I mentioned, I'm going to UNH for Civil War. Love the Civil War. Love history. And he goes, "Well, how would you like to live it?" And I
Whoa.
said, "Well,
That's a heck of
yeah,
a sales
yeah." I
pitch.
was like, "Well, tell me what that means." And so he's like, "Well, I'm part of an artillery unit, and so really all I had to do was go over and we shot the cannon
I,
once."
I
And it's
was
like,
gonna,
okay, well, it makes a big boom. Like
yeah,
I'm sold. Yeah,
that's what would
yeah.
give me is like, oh wait, can we fire the cannon?
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. So it's a fun time and it's a fun experience and
Yeah.
it's just hanging out.
So you're just kind of like looking for people that kind of show a little bit of interest in history, and you're like, that guy, that
Yeah,
that girl, she's gonna be interested.
yeah.
Yeah.
Some people are more into it than others because depending on how hardcore you go with it, it's living like it's 1862, and it can be interesting sometimes.
Yeah.
We uh we were supposed to go to an event this weekend down in New York, but we're getting 13 inches of snow allegedly. So that
Here?
apparently,
Oh.
yeah, it's somewhere between like 6 and 13 is what I keep seeing on weather apps and all that
All
stuff.
right.
And
Well, I guess we'll deal with
I
it.
said, not down for that. Not this weekend. And all of us were in agreement. But I mean, you can have like that Gettysburg event. I literally slept under a canvas tent in the same clothes for like 2 straight days in a potato field. So like I didn't have like a cot. I just
Yeah.
slept on a canvas bag.
And you don't want to do that with 13 inches of snow?
Don't want to do that. And there was a lot of rocks. It was hard to sleep. It's a lot of rocks. So yeah, some people, it's not for everyone, but
Yeah.
it can be very fun.
Yeah, yeah. What got you interested in history to begin with? Because obviously you've been interested in it for long enough to have studied it in college and then pursued a career in it.
Yeah.
What got you into history?
Well, I don't know to tell you the truth. I've loved history ever since I was a kid. I loved like the Revolutionary War. I think every boy growing up goes through some phase where it's like dinosaurs and eventually like ancient Egypt comes up or ancient Rome or something.
Yeah.
And mine was definitely Egypt. I remember getting like a refrigerator box after we bought the new fridge and I turned it into like my little Egyptian tomb once.
Okay.
But yeah, so I loved history as a kid. And I actually, yeah, so growing up did that, but it was not my original career idea.
Hmm.
I didn't think there would, obviously there's a job or a career field in it, but like it's very selective and it's kind of hard to get into.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't something that I had always kind of had the idea in the back of my mind of it. It was actually, I went to UNH my first semester as a marine biologist.
Okay.
And I was really interested in marine biology, loved going to the aquarium, and then turns out I just really like looking at the fish.
Not
So
taking care of them?
pretty much I basically took one chemistry course and I said, okay, so this isn't it. And so I was actually trying to figure out what to do. I was taking a history course at the same time, and my professor at that time said, well, what have you ever thought about the history department? My dad and one of my best friends growing up was also going for history at the same time at UNH, and the three of them kind of convinced me to try out, like one semester of it with the history department, and fell in love with it. And I went, for the rest of my time there, graduated from that, and it was around that time that I first started with the department, the history department, trying to figure out what I was going to do with it.
Yeah.
And having grown up in Dover, I remember coming here, a handful of times. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll go see if they need like help or volunteers. And I started volunteering here, and now it turned into I'm the director of the place. So
There you go.
Yeah.
That's another one for volunteering. Like,
Exactly.
I know the last season we talked to the Chamber of Commerce head, and she did a bunch of volunteering, and I've done volunteering, and like it opens up doors. You get to meet people. Like people, it just
does.
it can really do a lot for you.
It's a lot of that philosophy of like, do good and good will come to you sort of thing. And
Yeah.
so
Karma.
karma.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I love helping out when I can. And I volunteer with the chamber as much as possible. And Rotary as well. So
Okay.
yeah, so this is not the only thing I do, but I'm all over the place, and I like to, be part of the community and help out.
Yeah, nice, nice. You say you grew up in Dover, you studied right down the road in Durham,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And you live here now. So what you did do a bit of a tour on the Coast Guard in different states, but you've never really moved out of Dover, correct?
Well, so I did. So grew up here in Dover. Um, Lived in Rhode Island when I was stationed there,
Mm-hmm.
in Newport. Um, Moved back to Dover when I got stationed in Portland, Maine, and just commuted. But then I did do 3 years living down in Florida, um, and then came.
Not stationed anywhere.
Oh no, I was stationed at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola,
Gotcha.
and so yeah, so I did spend some time away, and I mean I traveled all over the country because of it,
Mm-hmm.
and this I don't know, this is my home. I like Dover. I like New Hampshire in
Mm-hmm.
general. It's just its own little unique corner of the world. There's something about it, and I think we talked about it earlier before actually starting recording here. Is that Dover itself it's an oddity in that like it's the fifth largest municipality in New Hampshire, but it's a very small town in like there's a lot of people. You just walk down the street and you're like, oh hey, I know you or I know
Mm-hmm.
you, and so there is a good sense of community in that, and so I think that's kind of what kind of draws me here,
Yeah,
and my
yeah.
family's here. So
So just
yeah.
that feeling of belonging to the community, and you kind of just, yeah, I know this, I am familiar with it, and because sometimes people grow up in an area and they're like, oh, I just can't wait to get out of here. You never
Mhm.
had that?
No, not really.
Oh,
I did when I went to Florida, just because I was
I
like, okay,
can't
well
wait to
this.
get out of here.
Well, it was more like, okay, this is my last unit. I've spent the entire time I was in the Coast Guard
Mhm.
here in the Northeast, at
Yeah.
least. Uh, let's try something else just one time. And so that was my one little brief foray out of the Northeast, and it's very hot. It's very hot down there.
It's quite toasty.
Yeah. I don't think I turned my air conditioner off from the day I moved in until
No.
about 2.5 years later when I
No,
left.
not when it's summer. You do not turn that air conditioner off.
So yeah, no, it's never really been a thing for me where it's like I cannot wait to get out of New Hampshire. I love New Hampshire.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's got to be a good feeling to, feel so proud and connected of the place that you live at.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So when you're not reenacting civil wars or giving tours at the museum, uh, what do you do in your free time?
Yeah. So I don't know. What does anyone do? I like to hang out with friends. A couple hobbies. I play guitar.
Yeah. Okay.
Growing up, I played a lot of ice hockey, so I'll watch like the Bruins every now and then, or football. I know we talked. You're from Birmingham, but
Yeah.
Roll Tide. Sorry.
Hey, you don't got to be sorry. That's great.
Yeah.
That's great.
So yeah, I love college football. Love the NFL. So my brother, our friends, and I will get together. We watch games. So it's hanging out with friends.
Yeah, yeah,
mostly walking around town.
It's funny to come up here. I had never met you, and I was just scheduling this for talking about the history and everything. And I get in here, and you've got a Roll Tide, Alabama Crimson Tide mug over here, and you're into it, the college. It's cool to see how big that sport can be, how it can bring people together from all over the country.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, you go anywhere, and it's bigger in some areas.
For sure.
I mean, down south, I'm sure it's like a religion down there.
That is absolutely true.
Yeah, but up here, it's a little bit different of a dynamic. There is a passion for just sports in general, college football. We do have some bigger teams that play in like that D1 kind of level. Like I think BC actually plays in D1. Even UNH, it's good football.
Yeah.
You go and watch the Wildcats play, and they actually made it to the playoffs last season. So
Very
that was
cool.
a fun thing to go watch.
All right.
So yeah, it's football and sports in general, especially around here. It's like Patriots, Bruins, Celtics. There are some diehard fans. Like Yeah.
That's where it starts getting off-putting to me, is like when you meet the people who are passionate about their team,
Hmm.
that's fun, that's
Oh, yeah.
cool. Yeah, tell me all about it. But then when you meet the people who are passionately against another team, that's where I'm like, okay, something's
Yeah.
going on here.
Yeah. Well, there's always a rivalry. And so that's kind of why poke fun at the Auburn,
Yeah.
Alabama, this sort of thing. But here, the big one is definitely like the Bruins and the Montreal Canadiens are like
Hmm.
one of the most volatile sports rivalries in all of sports. I think I saw ESPN ranked it in like the top 5.
Whoa.
It's yeah.
Alabama, where did all Alabama Auburn rank on
I
that?
don't know.
Because it's got to
True.
be
It's
it's
got to
got
be
to
up
be
there.
up there.
It's got to be. But yeah, no. It can go too far
Yeah.
sometimes. It can definitely go too far.
So I think I can use this as a segue, maybe. So our theme for the show this season is building bridges and overcoming disagreement.
Yeah.
So when you have a disagreement between, let's say, two sports fans that
Yep.
just they hate each other and there's this divide there, how do you bridge divides between people? What's an approach that people can use to overcome disagreement that separates us?
Commonality, I guess,
Okay.
is the word that immediately comes to mind. Using that whole sports analogy, you got the Bruins, you got the Canadians. They hate each other, but hey, we both love hockey.
Yeah.
So, not everyone is going to have the same opinion as you. Not everyone's going to have the same perspective. And, you know, when it gets volatile and violent and, you know, angry at one another, there's no progress. It's so civility and commonality, finding, okay, you disagree with that, I agree with this, but at least we're, thinking of the same topic and we're trying to find a solution. So so
So try to take it back to the things that you do agree on. Find that as a basis to work together on.
exactly. Yeah. I think that would definitely be what
Okay.
what what would work to build bridges is,
Yeah, yeah.
civility and treating people with respect.
Mm.
I I don't know if we just met, but I'm sure you have different opinions than I have different opinions, and you know we can be respectful and we
Yeah.
can converse about that. And so, yeah,
I think maybe remembering that the other person isn't trying to ruin your day.
exactly.
Like they're not here to just try to hey, I'm going to destroy everything that you're trying to build or whatever. There's this, hey, we're both trying to get to a solution just using different methods.
Yeah, we all want the best outcome, and so however we get to it, it should be done respectfully.
Hmm.
So
All right.
when that's the commonalities. We all want something good. So
Yeah.
So let's work towards it.
What do you think the city of Dover should focus on next? What would you like to see from the city of Dover?
Yeah. So you asked this right at the time that they are going through their whole process of redeveloping the master plan for the city for the next 10 years. So they're looking out to 35, I think is the year that they're looking to develop this thing. And so they're going around asking different organizations. We actually had a meeting this morning with the city before you got here, and their visioning planning board, asking, like, what are Dover's strengths? What are their weaknesses? And where would you like to see Dover in 10 years? And so I've actually had to do this like 3 times with just different organizations, the Rotary, the Arts Commission, and now here. And I hear a lot of the same points, one of which is affordable housing.
Okay.
So I would love to see more affordable housing in Dover. Dover has changed a lot since I moved here in the early 90s. And it's growing every day, but we keep adding all these like high-end apartments and Section 8 housing. And
Nothing in the
there's
middle.
nothing in the middle. So
Okay.
a lot of the people who grew up here in Dover cannot physically afford to live in Dover anymore. And so we're losing a lot of the middle class. So that's one major thing. The homeless issue here in Dover is another very large issue. And it's not just Dover, it's nationwide, but here in Dover, we should be focusing on it. there's a homeless problem, there's a drug problem,
Hmm.
and we're working towards it. But I'd just like to see that we do a little bit more for that. I mean, I think that goes back to the housing issue as well.
Yeah.
So those and tourism for Dover. Obviously, being the
Okay.
museum is another important thing for me.
Yeah.
So there's only so much to do in Dover. Um, I've said that like the 3 or 4 largest tourism attractions here in Dover are probably the Children's Museum in New Hampshire, the Strand Theater, and us. And downtown, that's about it. I mean, we have we have countless stores for shopping,
Yeah. Yeah.
restaurants, and that's great. I just like to see some more that draw people in, that maybe set us apart from other people.
Hmm.
I know that there was talks at one point of like a baseball field. That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Where they put that,
There's a skate park.
there is a skate park. They're actually tearing that one down and building a brand new one. So that one's going to be big.
Oh.
But I don't know, just some other sort of attraction.
Yeah.
Because other than that, like the closest things that we have are like Dover Bowl, the bowling alley, and that's actually technically in Rollinsford, and then Hilltop Fun Center, which is in Somersworth.
Yeah.
So there's not like a lot to do.
Okay. So some more destinations and entertainment attractions to bring people to Dover.
Exactly. Like as we're growing, like obviously we want to have more people come
Yeah.
here. So.
Going back just real fast to the affordable housing thing, in your opinion, what makes housing unaffordable in Dover? What gets in the way of building that middle?
Well, there's a handful of people that will pay that, and so a lot of people are moving to Dover, who work in like the city, and they just commute, and so we're getting a lot of. I don't know. I don't want to sound like the old man. Like we're getting a lot of city folk in this town, but it's
whippersnappers.
Yeah, but yeah. So I don't know what it is, but it's a lot of high-end apartments with these like insane amenities that do you really need that? Like there's I don't know. It's just like a lot has changed. The same apartment that I rented, I think like 10 years ago, was a 2-bedroom apartment. It cost us $900 a month for that apartment. It's now like $1,300. And that's like a really low end one. That's not bad. But the average one in town is like you're looking at like $1,900 a month, or there's some that are even like $2,000 all the way up to $3,000.
Yeah,
and no one's going to move out of those $1,300 or $1,400 ones because they're all taken up. Yeah. So the only really ones that are available are like the high end ones at this point. That's the only thing that they keep building. And so, yeah, the housing market also. I mean, this is nationwide, but yeah.
It's always interesting to me when I see things that afflict the entire nation at once, because all of our states are like, yeah, they all have their own laws and they're all doing things differently. But then when you have a problem and it like somehow hits all of them at once, it's weird.
It is weird.
It's weird how integrated things in the economy can be. You know, it's like, oh yeah, this thing that's happening over in this state is affecting us over in this one.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so we have like a small identity, like a New Hampshire state level identity, but there is this national identity, I guess, and we are all connected in one way or another. And so what affects someone in Oregon is eventually going to affect us here. So,
yeah. Well, it even, that connection that you're talking about, it even extends outside of just the United States. It's like stuff that happens in Canada affects us. Stuff that happens in Europe or, you know, China and other places around the world.
Well,
it can all affect us because we're all kind of like at this stage very tightly connected. We
are. It's this kind of worldwide identity, I guess. I said identity like 5 times, but yeah. I mean, you know, look at like groceries right now. A chicken farm out in the Midwest, you know, I think one caught fire or something like last year or something like that, and the price of chicken soared over here
Mm-hmm.
because that's where they're getting the chicken from. So, if something's gonna go up that, you know, affects the entire national market, it's gonna affect us here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down and talking to us. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we close?
Come visit the Woodman Museum. We open on April 5th for our tour season, and this is the big year. It's the 400th anniversary, so we have something going on event-wise every single month. And outside of events, it's just it's a fun place to be.
All right. Excellent. Well, thank you for listening to the Your City podcast, and I hope you enjoyed our talk today with Jonathan. The Dover Download, which is a local podcast for Dover, has an episode with Jonathan if you want to hear more about the Woodman Museum. And he's discussing the attractions of the museum, so you can head over there to learn more. If you enjoyed the show today, you can help us out by sharing it with someone else that you think might enjoy it. That helps us grow our audience. It helps us reach more people. It helps the show grow. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to it, and we will catch you on the next one.